Hello, this is Erica Swallow here. I'm excited to be chatting with you all. I see there are attendees coming in, so I'll give it a second there. But in the meantime, I'll introduce myself. I am excited to be a mentor/coach for the bootcamp in Rio. And today we're going to be talking about startup PR. How can you get PR on a tight budget? Because that's really what it's about to be a startup founder trying to get some press. So within my presentation here, I'm going to switch over. I will actually introduce myself after a quick presentation introduction. And if you have questions, feel free to ask those throughout. And Andrew, who's on the MIT team, will be kind of pinging those my way. Go ahead and Andrew, and you can even just come on your video to interrupt at any point because it's better to do it that way. Okay. Awesome. Perfect. Can you guys see my presentation? Okay, great. Perfect. It's good because I can't see the chat when I'm presenting, so that'll be lovely. So on this discussion, we'll be going over three key things. How do you interact with journalists? How can you understand the lingo of the journalism world? And how do you actually compose engaging pitches that intrigue journalists to actually want to write about your startup? And to get started on this topic, though, what really is startup PR? I think of it as a list of pros and cons. On the negative side, you don't have any reputation. You're just launching. Nobody's probably heard of you. You don't have a budget. You often don't have someone on staff who's focused on PR, and you are running lean, so you don't really have extra time usually to try to be pitching. But on the positive, there are actually some good things to this. There is a newness to startups that actually is a pro for journalists. We're interested in writing about the new things out there, so that's in your favor. Also, it's really great working with founders because they have huge passion for what they do. It's not like getting pitches from the big companies out there who are just, kind of cogs in the wheel droning on about the new latest product they have that may or may not be that incredibly interesting compared to the previous release. So startups have that in their favor. And what I would actually still consider a pro is that you actually don't have too much PR experience potentially, especially maybe if you're choosing to be in a seminar like this. And that's actually a huge pro because journalists get a lot of the same sounding pitches all day long. And so not having PR experience can actually be a positive sometimes. But there are best practices. Oops. Okay, so a little bit about me. I have an MBA from MIT Sloan, and I did undergrad at NYU Stern. So my whole background is in marketing and business. But as soon as I got into the work world, I went straight into media, first as a social media marketer, because I was intrigued in 2008, 2009 about how media companies were using technology to reach large audiences. So I worked at the New York Times. Soon after that, though, I was really inspired by the news side of the New York Times and went to Mashable as an editor. Now I spent a number of years working at tech startups, and also I have my own consulting firm called Southern Swallow, in which I work on content strategy. And these days I work in education at Summit Public Schools, working on Summit Learning, which also has a tech component. So I'm very used to that, also sort of pitching what we are doing from many angles. And I've also published quite a bit of places, from Forbes and the Wall Street Journal to Mashable and Business Insider. My early career in journalism was very much focused on tech startups. So throughout this presentation, I'm going to be using a lot of examples from especially my time at Mashable, because that's when I first wrote this presentation, actually. The content in this presentation, though, is very evergreen. I don't think a lot of things change regarding how you deal with tech journalists. So I hope that these real-life examples will give you some inspiration and guidelines for how you can also be crafting your own pitches. So here are the key points we'll go through. And feel free throughout to ask questions, because it's always good to have the questions in context of each of these points. So we're going to talk about how to craft a concise, value-driven message. I'll give you a formula, sort of, to start with, and then you can run with it from there. Also, it's important to know what's newsworthy. Sometimes journalists get overwhelmed with things that maybe you consider interesting, but that the journalist on the other end of the email doesn't really think is worth their audience's time. So we'll talk about what exactly is newsworthy. There are some great things you can do as a startup, especially since you have a lot of data at your hand. We'll talk about how you can offer up unique data, which sometimes you can't get your actual product to be covered first, but you can start off with some stuff, some back-end information data that you've collected on user behavior that maybe speaks to larger trends. Some things to know: understand the journalist coverage area, know the lingo of journalism, and send awesome emails. Essentially, we do a lot of this work on email, so it's important to stand out. I'll give some tips on that. One little known fact is that the best way to reach the media is through Twitter. So we'll talk about tweeting it up. And finally, I'll introduce you, if you haven't already heard, about reverse pitching as another outlet for getting coverage. So first, let's talk about crafting a concise, value-driven message. I just have 3 quick points on this one, and then I'll give you some examples. So the very basic start of this is to be able to answer the question or to fill in the blank of my startup is A. In a second, I'll give you even more interesting formula for that, but this is, you should be able to answer this in an email, and it should be one of the 3 or 4 sentences of your email pitch. Also, cut down on industry jargon. I'll give you some examples of some pretty bad pitches that I've gotten that have way too much jargon for me to be interested. And then finally, this sentence that you are using, it should be used everywhere. It should be on your website. It should be in your pitches. It should become the one message you're trying to get across, because that's how not only journalists but also users start to recognize your brand and what you offer, and that's how you create mind share within your audience. So here are some examples. These are sort of old, so they're probably slightly outdated, but these are some of the very early versions of these companies. SKILLSHARE is a community marketplace to learn anything from anyone. So you get just generally what they do. When I first heard about SKILLSHARE, I thought, oh, that's a great idea. And all they would have had to do is send me this one sentence and a link to their website. Airbnb is a trusted community marketplace for people to list, discover, and book unique spaces around the world, online or from an iPhone. These days, more than just an iPhone. But once again, a one-sentence pitch that you see the value, unique spaces, you know how they do it, and you get that it's a marketplace. That's good enough for me to want to be interested. Lot 18 is a membership by invitation website for wine and Epicurean products from coveted producers at attractive discounts. As a wine lover myself, this one caught me. All of these, by the way, are startups I wrote about early on from these sentences. And then here's one that I actually got. These are all real examples. Here's one I got where I'm like, no, this is not how you do this. Companies are now adopting the same level of attention to data-driven design, optimization, engagement, and monetization that their social game counterparts are. And many of them are winning big. Company X, a user analytics firm based in San Francisco, helps them to do so. Would you be interested in learning more? No. This intro to their company doesn't help me at all. It has a lot of jargon, all crunched up all in one place. Data-driven design, optimization, engagement, monetization, social game counterparts. What are they talking about? Are their customers, what kind of companies? And what are they talking about? Social game counterparts. So it was, this is an example that I see quite often is a startup will try to jam too much in there, and they really don't get what their own company is doing. They could have just had a "my company is" sentence and really made it clear for me. Here's my favorite though. This is borrowed from the Founders Institute. They have a great 1-minute pitch video out there, and here's their formula. My company, insert your company name, is developing a defined offering to help a targeted audience solve a problem with secret sauce. This is my favorite because it gets to every single part that I would need to know as a writer to want to actually potentially write about you. I need to know who you're serving. I need to know what you do. I need to know what is the problem and what makes you so special as a company and team that you should be solving this problem. And you can do it all in one sentence. I geek out over this because it's so fun. So TechCrunch, they used to do this annual competition of startups using that formula. So here's the one that won, I think in maybe 2012 or something, but I just give it as an example. My company, Flat Club, is developing an online marketplace to help students and alumni of top universities find short-term accommodation by leveraging existing social networks to create trust. Obviously, this is not the one sentence that you put on the very front of your website because it's lengthy, but this is the one sentence you would pitch in a media pitch because it gives the journalist every single thing they need to know about what you're doing. And so I thought that was a pretty good one. Any questions, by the way, Andrew, that we should answer?
Well, so there was one question which was, will they get the slides? And we already have this. Yeah. So.
Yeah, you have the slides, and then also I'll be putting them up on slideshare.com/EricaSwallow afterwards, if that's cool.
Yeah, absolutely. Then you just do that, and then we can link to it in the YouTube recording that will be available afterwards.
Perfect, and I'll send that link to you afterwards then.
Thank you.
Awesome. All right, so moving on to the next key point here is to know what's newsworthy. In my oops, it's supposed to say what's newsworthy at the top. There is a typo. There's a typo. A startup's launch or relaunch, a new product, study your data, a current event or partnerships. All of these are relevant. So I'm going to go through some examples. So a startup's launch or relaunch. These are real emails that I received in full. I didn't want to cut anything from it, and you can review these slides afterwards to kind of see the whole thing. But this was a pitch that I got from a now defunct startup, and maybe around 2011 or 12. It says, Busy is going to change local search by launching a recommendation engine and business census at the end of the month. And the founder and president of Busy, Gadi Shamia, would like to sit down with you prior to the announcement to show you how the engine will work. In this first paragraph, I'm already interested because they've told me there's a newsworthy event, there's a launch going on, and they also offered up their CEO to me. So I always am interested immediately when, and this was a bit of they had a marketing and PR person on their team, but I'm always interested when I can immediately talk to the source of the information, and that is one of the founders. Secondly, the local business census will ask users 20 questions about the local businesses in their area in order to gauge their preferences. Once complete, Busy will have what it needs to provide you with a recommendation the way a friend would in a fun and interactive way. So that immediately said, oh, that's kind of interesting. This is a lot different than maybe Yelp or other things out there because it's really based on you just do this quick 20 question survey and they should be able to recommend stuff to you. I'm like, oh, what are these questions? So my interest was piqued there. So there have been 2 tiers of online local search, Yellow Pages and Yelp, and Zagat's Review. We are moving into the 3rd tier of predictive technology, creating the ability to provide users and consumers with recommendations based on their preferences. So then, of course, this is a light for me regarding trends and what's coming up. So as a technology journalist, that was interesting. And they say it would be based on friends, and they have a proprietary algorithm. So obviously, I'm like, bing, 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 interested. So those are just some things about this particular pitch and a launch and that got me. And I ended up writing about it. You can see, it was 2010 here. Get custom local business recommendations with Busy. And that was in Mashable. Another one would be a new product. Maybe you already have a business, but you are launching a new product, and there are ways to make that intriguing. This is one of my favorite pitches, and you'll see that I really and most journalists, we just like personable emails or ways of getting, if it's a tweet, an email, or whatever, make it personable and make it really understandable that you know who we are and what we cover. So this person said, saw on Twitter that you had downloaded our new app, Snooth Wine Pro. Hope you're enjoying it or will enjoy it on your trip to Napa, Sonoma. So I had just tweeted, wow, this app seems really cool, and I'm going to Napa and Sonoma, so I'm going to test it out. So this person was a marketing and PR teammate at Snooth and was obviously monitoring their work, their Twitter feed, and reached out to me as a journalist, saw who I was, reached out, and then I was like, oh, wow, okay, cool. I mean, I'm already interested because I've already downloaded it. They said, I've sent some information to your counterpoints, but haven't had any luck. So I realized, okay, he's already been trying to talk to Mashable. He then talks about how he was previously a startup founder for a music search engine called Streamzy. So I thought, oh, this guy like has a cool background. He himself seems representable. The team has a cool app. And then he ends with, I've included our press release below and a link to find screenshots and contest info. Let me know if you'd like some promo codes to gift your readers. Again, I appreciate your consideration. So in this case, I already see a lot of value because I already can go through, find those screenshots. He's gonna give Mashable readers promo codes because I think it was maybe a couple dollars to download the app originally. So I'm like, great. The first however many hundred users get it for free. Those are already always great additions. So wrote about it. iPhone app uses image recognition to help you master wine selection. So it ended up being, it was a $5 iPhone app. So all of our, users for a certain period of time or number of users got that $5 app for free. And I tested it and App and Cinnamon really liked it and used it for quite a while. Now I don't use it anymore. I just know what I like to drink. And last one here, study your data. One of the ways you can, as I mentioned earlier, if you're having a hard time pitching your startup itself or pitching a new product that you've launched, one like sneaky roundabout way is to use some of the data you have to tell a trend story. So here's an example. My client Qubit has done some research into retail websites and has come up with a list of top reasons that people don't convert into paying customers. We'd be more than happy to do a top ways to improve website conversion style piece off the back of that if you're interested. I ended up writing top 10 reasons your website is losing sales. And of course, for them, it's great because they're going to get the links. They're going to be able to share this. They can now put on their website that they've been written about in Mashable. Hey, it wasn't exactly about their actual, their business fully, but there is a few sentences about what Qubit does. So they are getting slightly in front of that, and they're probably getting a lot of SEO boost for getting into such a big publication, especially in tech.
Erica, before you move on to the next part, there were some questions specific to, for example, Sean asked, what are the differences in pitching to media in different countries, industries, and even parts of the US? Are they the same? Are they different? Can you share a little bit of that?
Great question. So the question was, what are the differences between media in different countries and in the US, and as well as regions in the US, correct? Okay, cool. Great question. There obviously are a lot of differences. I think the way that the media, so my experience is in the US, so I'll speak to that. I do have a little experience working with outlets in other countries, so I can also address that a little bit. And I've written for some UK outlets as well. They tend to work about the same. So in the US, there's not too much of a big difference between one outlet to the next. I'd say that all of the tech press works the same. Essentially, there's a news inbox where you can openly pitch. News at Mashable, news at, or whatever, tips at TechCrunch might be the email. You have to look it up. But they all have a newsroom. They have editors who are looking for stories. There's one way, the inbox. Then there's also Google Trends, searching for what's out there. There's also obviously reporters on the ground going out to events, seeking out the latest trends, going to find founders themselves to figure out what's out there. And then there's the best way to get in touch with journalists is to individually reach out, so that those large mailboxes like the media mailbox, news, email us your tips, those are very much overlooked. The best way is to find the right person to pitch. If it's someone who loves wine, for example, and happens to be a tech reporter and you are a wine startup, that person is a better person to pitch than any other person at that company, plus the media inbox, the news inbox. Whenever we're talking about other countries, so I've worked with UK, Hong Kong, a few other places, but generally it's about the same. You always want to do the same due diligence. You want to be able to understand the publication, understand their audience, and understand the individual you're reaching out to, what they write about, and if this is really in their recent coverage. Sometimes people who are pitching journalists make a mistake and say, hey, I saw that you wrote about Qubit, for example, and I think you'd be interested in my startup. Well, I wrote about Qubit's data in 2010, so it's really not it may not be in my coverage area these days, what I'm writing about these days, like what I wrote 8 years ago. So I'd say internationally, that's kind of how it works. You want to try to go as personable as possible, and you want to try to speak to an individual and not just the inbox. I hope that answers your question, but that's been my experience so far.
Erica, another follow-up question was, how defined should the target audience be specific to the pitch that you're writing to, the journalist? For example, how, to your point, somebody wrote about, you wrote about Qubit, but then somebody starts pitching to you about something that you wrote previously. How would the entrepreneurs and innovators know what journalists are thinking about or what's on their plate and their focus?
Yeah, that's a great
And also another follow-up question to that is, how do you time your PR pitch specific to the stage of your launch or whatever other stage, say fundraising as an example?
Yes, good question. So how do you, if you're writing for that audience that it's journalists, how do you really know what's on their mind? I have a few slides on this in a little bit, but I'll also just address a little bit now. The main thing is to, just like with your users, understand what their problem or need is, and then address that in your communication. So for journalists, for journalists, we're looking for the latest news within a certain vertical. You can understand what vertical by going to our bylines. So many journalists have a website or portfolio, and on all of those sites that they write, they have their list of most recent posts. So if you're looking at their bio and their what's called a byline, it's like by Erica Swallow is the byline. Just click on my name. It'll show you everything I wrote for Forbes or Mashable, etc. And then you can see in the past 2 months, Erica has written a whole bunch about marketplaces, for example. So if you are a marketplace, you probably are like, she's writing about marketplaces a lot. And you can actually bring that kind of thing up in your email. I'll give you some tips on that also in a bit, but you can bring up that I see you have quite an interest in marketplaces. You've written about SKILLSHARE, Airbnb, Lot 18. We have a marketplace for dog sitting, and I think this could be up your alley. What makes us unique is, that's kind of a way to pitch that. And then the second part of the question, what was the second part of the question?
The question was timing, right? Is the idea of the windows of opportunity. You're about to launch a startup, you're about to raise your first round, you're about to do something. How do you time that and the release of that PR? And what kind of, I guess the period that you need to start reaching out and to plan ahead?
Great question. So on timing for reaching out, my biggest recommendation is, at a minimal, you should always give a journalist a week in advance for any key updates. So if you're planning, it's a Monday and you want this news to come out on Monday, you should be sending out all of your emails and stuff today. However, that's if you already know this person. Or if you feel like you have a really great tweet or pitch via email, a week in advance is a minimal. The best way, though, is to try to get to know the journalist way in advance. My favorite thing to do is to start following them on Twitter, get to understand, you'll see them every now and then, see what they're talking about, tweeting about, maybe like some of their stuff. I mean, be authentic, obviously. Engage in conversation with them over the course of months. You don't want to just email a journalist, obviously, and say, hey, I want to get to know you. It'd be great to know you. So whenever I launch my startup, or we're about to raise maybe in a couple months, you don't want to do that, because that's kind of like a creepy move. It's like, I don't know what it's like. I was going to compare it to dating, but it would also be weird if you really like caught up with someone, say, hey, I'm still in a relationship, but a few months from now, it'd be interesting to get to know you. Maybe it's sort of like that. I'm not sure. But you do want to try to get them to know them as early as possible, and then give them a week in advance for stuff. And we'll talk about what an embargo is and exclusive. Embargoes, though, since we're on this topic, is whenever you give them the information and you say, you usually want to get them to agree before you send it. But if you're like a new startup, it's usually okay to just send it and tell them there's embargo. Nobody I know has ever broken one. It means this information is not available until July 1st at 9 a.m. Eastern time. And so that means, hey, I'm giving you the information so that you have time to gather interviews, to write up the piece, and then the earliest you can actually publish it is that embargoed time. All right, we'll get to more on that too in a second. So I'll quickly get through offering up unique data since we talked about it a little bit. But startups, you really do. Tech startups have a ton of data to offer. These were some of my, not these exact posts, but working at Mashable, some of my favorite random pitches were about just data and infographics and different white papers and studies that have been conducted by startups or even larger companies. Here were a few. How small businesses are using social media. It was an infographic and it used a ton of data from, I can't remember which one. It wasn't Hootsuite. It was a small business social media management startup. And they had all this information about the times of day, the number of platforms that small businesses were using, and all this sort of stuff, like how many tweets on average a day, what different types of industries do what. And so this was one I wrote, and as you can see, it got quite a bit of shares from back then. Top reasons why consumers unsubscribe via email, Facebook, and Twitter. This one not only was a fun, like, multi-page report that came from another communications startup, but it had great graphics related to like the little heart candies. I'll show you one on the next slide. And then how consumers interact with brands on Facebook. This was probably like a Facebook management company tool. So here's one of those from one of those white papers. The one on breaking up was kind of what they were talking. They were making a breakup comparison for unsubscribing on email. So fans, typical action when they no longer want to see posts from a company. Nothing, click the X, go to companies, etc. But they had all kinds of graphics like this, and I don't know. It was high production, so maybe I wouldn't always recommend it. But this is the kind of interesting data that is unique to a lot of startups out there. All right, we were talking about this a bit ago. How do you understand a journalist's coverage area? So I always like to say reporters' inboxes are so, they're so overwhelmingly repetitive that if you can do it at all, try to avoid this sentence that is probably at the top of 50% of the emails the journalists will get. I read your post called blank, and I think you'd be interested in my startup. Now, that being said, this is, oh man, I need to update some of these slides. That being said, even though you're avoiding the other sentence, here's an example of that sentence in action when it actually works well. Loved your piece a few days ago. I sent it around to all of my company to read. Is this a preview of your class? I've been meaning to reach out to you because our CEO, Ron Tarosian, just published his first book for immediate release, which addresses a lot of the points you made, as well as, and so this is an example where he used one exact piece that I wrote. It was basic, I think it was the top tips for it was a startup PR blog post, and it really was a preview of my class that I was giving on this topic that you guys are hearing now as well. So this person actually knew that I had a class. He knew that he was reading my piece, and then his CEO was launching a book that was obviously about startup PR as well, and he was saying, your post addressed a lot, but this book actually has even more. And then his email had a few bullet points probably and went into depth. So obviously it makes me think, ooh, what did I miss? I want to know more. I want to read this book and write about it potentially. So that is something to think. Another thing is to look obviously on social media. This is a screenshot of an app called Muckrack Pro. Sometimes I recommend it to founders who are very, they love using apps, and they also are like, I'll do whatever it takes. There is a fee for using this app, but it's basically a great way to build a media list. You can look at certain beats. You can go to specific journalists, and you can set up alerts for for all kinds of stuff, really. So this was taken way back in, wow, this is taken quite a bit time ago, but it kind of pulls in all your social media, all your updates, and then it is an easier way to, like, as you're looking at journalists, to say, yes, I want to pitch this one, I want to pitch this one. There are other features and stuff, but this is another like super duper tool you can use. And then finally, we talked about this a bit earlier, but here's a visual representation. This is my portfolio. This is from quite a few years ago as well, but this is all my work. It has all the places I've written for. You can click on it. If you click on, these are my featured work, but if you were to click on Forbes, for example, you'd see the posts I've written for Forbes, and then you'd get a good idea of what kind of stuff I'm interested in. I'd also recommend clicking through, if you're interested in pitching, for example, don't pitch me, by the way, because I don't write that much anymore. But if you were going to pitch this Erica Swallow a long time ago on Forbes, you would go to my Forbes profile and look at the very most recent stuff I had written. Because like I said, I'm featuring my top favorite written content here, not necessarily my, not featuring it by the reverse chronological order. Okay, so once you do all that and you know a journalist, this, you should know not to send me stuff like this, but this is one that I actually received one time. I think I was having a particularly bad day, so I decided to put them in my presentation at some point, but Archport Footwear began offering the first sandals with flashlights that fit inside the sole. There are 20 days remaining to take advantage of this offer. Each pair of Archport sandals arrives with a flashlight that fits into a chamber located in the arch of the sole. The flashlight is ideal for night outings during the summer. And then it kept going on and on and on. It was a very long email. But if you would have looked at my coverage, you would have found that I'm not really I don't live near a beach. I don't go outside. I don't at night in sandals, like I don't get that either. That this would not be at all in my coverage area. Alas, these things still come flooding into everyone's inboxes because a lot of people just don't know how to be efficient with their pitching. They just say, oh, I got a list of 100 journalists. I'm going to pitch them all the same thing. And so this is why I get things like this. And I just delete them immediately. All right.
Can I ask a quick question here? So yeah. It really sounds like, you know, what you're saying here is that do your research. Do you have best practices or tips on how to do that research?
Yes. So doing the research on the journalist, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So as I mentioned, Twitter, I mean, you can find most journalists on Twitter, and you can see up to probably 10 minutes ago what this journalist is thinking about. What do they care about in life? You know, as simple as looking at that, their bio, looking at all those bylines. But I really think the more up to date you can get, like Twitter is probably the best place. Looking the same way you would look up candidates that you're trying to hire, you would look at maybe their LinkedIn, you'd look at, I always look at Twitter. I just do a simple Google to see what comes up first. Some other things that are interesting is you don't always have to start that first line. In the Write Awesome Emails section coming up, I talk about the exact few sentences that I would recommend, and I actually have a whole nother PowerPoint on SlideShare about specifically email pitches and some good examples of email pitches that are just 3 or 4 sentences long. That first sentence, though, I always say it should be something related to the journalist that connects you intimately with them. So it could be you went to the same school. Could be that you both enjoy cycling. You know, whatever the most connected you can make yourself to that person. Or the best way is if you can go on LinkedIn, find the journalist, and see that you have a contact in common. That's the number one way, is get an introduction. Then you can ask your friend, hey, I see you're connected to this particular journalist. I'm really interested in his coverage on this, and I think maybe they'd be interested in writing about our startup. Would you be down to give us an introduction? That way they're likely to respond because you have a mutual friend in common. So I always use LinkedIn for that as well. And then, whenever you respond back, whenever you get an introduction, or if it's a cold email or a tweet, well, tweets are harder to put like that whole why we have stuff in common. But that first sentence should always be kind of relating why you're reaching out to them. And it can be something as soon as simple as, it's so cool to see that we both went to MIT. and now you're writing about top startups or whatever. I don't know what it would be. That's kind of a dorky sounding one, but you're writing about top startups. But we both did this, and now I'm doing this. I think it would be great to talk with you, and maybe you would be interested in learning about what we're up to these days.
Erica, there's quite a few more questions. Is it okay to ask them now?
Yeah.
So Jay's asking, what's the appropriate amount of time or time frame for follow-up if you haven't heard back from the journalist after the initial email outreach?
I would say 2 days. I know that seems like a ton because you're trying to get this out, but give them 24 hours, maybe at the end of that day. So maybe you emailed them. I recommend emailing in the morning, 7, 8 a.m. or, in their time zone. So you can try to be at the top of their inbox. That way they'll at least see you. So it could be even set 8, 9, between 7 and 9 a.m. Maybe you get to the top of their inbox, give them the whole day. Whenever I get a follow-up the next morning, it kind of sometimes frustrates me because I am like, I know. I feel like a failure actually. I'm like, I can't get to all the emails. So if you give them to at least the end of that first day, so you email them on a Monday morning, Tuesday, like almost at the end of the business day, you can maybe email them then. But my actual recommendation is the second day in the morning. So a Wednesday in the morning. But make sure on your follow-up, you don't say, just following up to see if you got that email, or is this something you're interested in? Try to give them a new piece of information. So it would be wonderful, for example, if 2 days later, you already got a few journalists interested. So, hey, Erica, just following up, I want to let you know that TechCrunch and the Business Insider are going to be writing about this next Monday. It'd be great to connect you with our CEO to chat about this. If you're at all interested, let me know, or something like that. Or if there's any other new information, maybe it's not that there are other publications writing about it, but maybe it's some really great news. We won this. We also happened to win this award yesterday. I don't know what it could be. Or, some of the most random stuff happens, like, our CTO is going to be in New York tomorrow if you're interested in grabbing coffee or something like that. If you can ever offer up an in-person, it always seems more, I always just seem more connected to a person whenever they randomly have something like, they live in the same city, or they are going to be in my city in a few weeks or something. Those sort of things, so you can use those non-answered pitches too the next time around. So maybe a few months go by, they didn't write about that particular thing, you did a follow-up, you maybe did a second follow-up, the news went by. You can follow up months later and say that it was, don't ever make them feel bad about not answering, by the way, because that never making someone feel guilty feels nice. And that doesn't make them likely to be your friend or want to write about you. But you can follow up and say, since the launch of our startup back in August, when I last reached out, we've done these things, and then maybe there's some better, even more interesting thing. Like I said, like you can read about some of the most recent stuff we're doing in these pieces, like linking to other news. Then the journalist starts to feel like they missed out, so they're like, oh, maybe I should listen to them this time around. Obviously, that's the way you want it to work. You don't want it to be like, nobody covered me, and now I'm trying again. It's really hard. So yes, they'll reach out 2 days, I'd say, and then you can reach out maybe 2 days later, and then after that, they're probably just not interested. So 2 pieces of lingo for you. Some ways to get a journalist enticed sometimes is to offer an exclusive. This is when an author, such as myself, gives a publication like Mashable the right to be the first publication to report on a given story. In your case, it's when you, as a startup founder, are giving the journalist the rights to be the first to publish. So, for example, we're launching a new app, and we'd love Mashable to be the first outlet to write about it. So if I see exclusive in your subject line, usually I recommend putting that in parentheses or brackets or something like that if it really is an exclusive. You can't, by the way, pitch 10 journalists an exclusive. You have to do it one by one. So if you maybe start 2 weeks back or something like that, hopefully you've made a really good, you've already built these relationships over the past few months. Maybe you went to a meetup. That's another place to meet journalists, is to go to try to figure out where they go. You can find this stuff on Twitter, by the way, or if they're super public with, I don't know who uses Foursquare anymore, but back in the day, if they were very public with that, but Twitter, Instagram, you can find out where journalists go. This sounds stalkery, but hey, what do you do anything for some press? If they're a part of a meetup, you can coincidentally run into them at the meetup, or find ways to get in front of journalists in person so that you can hand them your card, get their card. Don't forget to get their card, because you need to be the one reaching out. They probably are not going to just email you from a card. So giving an exclusive is always a good, it gives me a little extra motivation to click the button, because I'm like, oh, okay, well, maybe. But then they can also decline it, or it's the worst when they don't answer your exclusive. Then you can just respond and say, if after following up once more, you can say, hey, I'm gonna need, I'm planning on offering this up to another another publication if I don't hear from you by this time or whatever. You can also do that. But you don't ever want to get in a situation where you've pitched it to multiple journalists and then they both say yes, because then you're in a sticky situation. That would be immoral. Embargo is a request by a source, that's you, that the information or news provided by that source not be published until a certain date or certain conditions have been met. Typically, this is a date and time. Just so you know, as we mentioned earlier, if you're having news that's going to come out next Monday, you don't want to be pitching them next Monday. You want to be pitching them last week. So this is the way that you can get the information out there without it leaking. And so you typically, if you're a really well-known company, you can do things like ask them if you have really big news regarding the launch of a new product or regarding something, and you'd like to share it with them. Would they agree to embargo? You can say that, but typically, if you're a small startup I've never heard of, and then I'm just like, well, who are you? What? I don't care. I guess, but I'm usually, it's like, I don't know. So the way that startups usually do it is they say, here is attached is information or link to something. And usually this does kind of come in a press release, even though I don't really like press releases, but he attaches the press release. It's about the launch of our whatever. And it's embargoed until July 1st at 9 a.m. Eastern time. Usually people will choose embargo times that are Eastern time, because that's like the sun rises first in the east over there, and so we start the news cycle over there in New York and all the other cities on the East Coast. So it can be 9, it can be 6 a.m. Some people do it for like 12:01 a.m. So you can do it any day on that. So I tend to, whenever I do it, just do it for 9 a.m. Eastern. Sometimes it can be as early as 6 a.m. because you want to start getting the SEO going early on that day. And the point of an embargo is so that you can get everybody to release it. So you want all of the news outlets that you're pitching to release 5, 6, 7 news pieces right on that Monday at that time to get the buzz going. And also so that they can have time to do interviews with your whoever it is, your tech team, with you, with your customers, whoever it is that you think is the most important, or they think too. So now we get to the emails. I've been talking about this. Make sure you customize your pitches. This is going to seem basic, but so many people get it wrong. Make sure you have the correct journalist name on your email. I'm not Eric, even though I do answer emails that say Eric if they're interesting enough. I'm also not Jessica or Monica or any other names. Also, I'm not just hey or hello or to whom it may concern. Also, man, I typed all this up. I reformatted this morning. I had a lot of typos. I'm going to fix them before I put on SlideShare. So a mention of his or her publication. So I write for a ton of publications. Which one do you actually want to pitch me for? Is it for Business Insider? Is it for Forbes? Is it for Mashable? Sometimes people accidentally say the wrong one that I don't even write for, by the way. So I'm just saying, be careful of that too. And finally, what's your true interest in their recent coverage or their coverage area? I like to say to avoid press releases. I'll talk about if you use them and if you don't use them. Let's first go down to if you don't use them, because this is the thing I was talking about earlier. One sentence, you want to start it with you want to have at least one sentence defining your startup and 2 to 3 sentences explaining the occasion for your pitch. I'd say that the first sentence is one of those latter. So the first sentence is how you're connected to them, what you know about them, and this is where it's like if you have something in common, you met them at the meetup, and you're following up, you saw that they cover marketplaces a lot, etc. Then a sentence about what's happening with your company, and a sentence about what your startup does, and then a sentence about what you're going to offer them, or what is the thing. So you want to, hey, Erica, it was nice meeting you at the New York Tech Meetup last Wednesday. I wanted to write you to tell you about the most recent product launch my startup company X is having. We do this, and this new product is going to bring it to the next level by Y. I'd love to get coffee with you in the coming week. We're launching on whatever date. Or if you want to check out our video in advance, you can find it here, Vimeo link with password or something like that. That was just a quick email. I just made that one up in my brain. So that's just a quick example. It gets straight to the point, tells me how I know you, what your startup does, what is the occasion. If you do use a press release, most of them are really useless. They're just a bunch of jargon, mumbo jumbo stuff that I wouldn't actually use in my writing. But if you do, be informative, not salesy. You're trying to inform the journalist so that they can write about this and determine if it's useful for their audience. Omit quotes. A lot of press release writers, it's pretty common, they like to put we are so excited about this, said CEO Dan Smith. We look forward to the next stage of our company's growth. And that is a throwaway quote. Most of them are always throwaway quotes. And usually, if I'm a good writer, I'm going to get my own quote. It's going to be unique from any other publication's quote from the CEO or anyone else. Partnership quotes, all that kind of stuff, I tend to say, can I just speak with Dan Smith so I can talk to him about what really what's going on here? You can attach the press release to the email or copy and paste it below the signature line, or you can embed a link to the press release, which is another easy way to do it, or offer to send it later if you don't really think you necessarily need it. That's one of those things you can do as the final thing. Would you like to chat with our CEO? I can also send you the press release if this sounds interesting to you. Finally, email subject lines are extremely important. This is kind of like the advertisement for me to click on to read the rest of the information. So here are some informative subject lines I've received, and I'll tell you why I like them. Story, building landing pages that convert. Obviously, back in the days when I was writing about, marketing, this would have been really important. I'm like, okay, great. So what is it about how did I know? Do they have data behind this? I want to know. Snooth launches Shazam for wine. This is dated, obviously, because Shazam, but back then, Shazam for wine, I immediately got the idea. I didn't even need to read the one sentence pitch. I actually could tell from these 5 words what they do. Top tips for e-commerce websites. Once again, listicles were in, so I was like, oh, this could be interesting. And we also had a lot of e-commerce content at that time. Exclusive, performance reviews go social, infographic. So there are 2 things on this one. It's an exclusive, so they're offering it up to me as the only publication that they're pitching right now. And secondly, they put in there that it was an infographic, so I can determine within a minute by looking at the infographic and all the content in it if I'm going to want to publish this or not. So I'm like, oh, this is an easy investment. It's exclusive, and all I have to do is go read the infographic to see if this is relevant. And in this case, it was relevant too. And even if it wasn't relevant, it made me click. Secondly, some useful assets you can include in your pitch or linked to in your pitch are a company or product description, obviously your website linked over your name, photos, videos, screenshots that are relevant to the story, and your company logos. You don't necessarily put these straight into your email, but they should be easily found for journalists. 2 ideas for implementation is you can have a zipped attached file or link to it in a Google Drive folder or something like that for them to access at any point. Or you can even have a media page on your website. Here's on the right side with some of the screenshots that earlier Snooze app had linked to me in their pitch. So that was just some easy stuff that was helpful. I think I may or may not have ended up taking my own screenshots, but it's always helpful to just be able to quickly see it without having to download it and everything. All right, we're talking about Twitter a lot, so I'll go ahead and I've already talked enough about it, but I'll just say, this is a quote from a publicist, Nicole Denton. She said, "It's amazing to me that I get much higher response rate when pitching reporters via Twitter than email. I would actually go as far as to say that every time I've pitched a reporter via Twitter, I have gotten some sort of response, often resulting in a story for my client. Via email, I have maybe a 50% response rate. The phone call response rate would be my lowest." This is also my experience with dealing with all types of people, not just journalists, but reaching out to any type of person on Twitter who I wanted to talk with. I find that if I write a compelling tweet, they're more likely to respond because it's the lowest level of effort on my part to respond to a tweet than to respond to an email or to go click through and look at your whatever. And also on Twitter, when you send it from, I usually like to send it from the founders, you send it from your Twitter account if you have a good one, hopefully. And or send it from your startup's Twitter account if it's better than your, like, kind of like, what does your Twitter account say about you? If someone clicks to your founder one, your personal one, and they say, wow, this person seems really impressive, I'd love to talk to them. If that's not the case, then you can just do it from your startup one. But either way, I think you should mention probably yourself, because that shows that I'm talking to a real person, or whoever's tweeting. I need to know who it is. But really the best way is to say, maybe even respond to one of their tweets and say, oh, like if they've shared something that's relevant, you can respond to their tweet and say, oh, we do something similar. We'd love to chat with you about what's coming up. And our CEO at person is like I am the CEO, tweeting behind this, by the way, or whatever, so that I know, okay, like, so then what that does for me is it allows me to click through to both of those profiles. So I know who I'm talking to, even if it's like the marketing intern, for example, it could be anyone. You can just sign off, by the way. You don't have to write, I am this person, but I can see who I'm talking to. And I can also click through. Twitter profiles are amazingly efficient. I see immediately when I get to your Twitter profile what your startup does, because you have like that one sentence line up there. I can see your URL and click through to that real quick. And then I can also see like what you've been tweeting and like how many followers you have, all this kind of stuff that I can immediately get a grasp of how influential or interesting your startup is. And I'm on the last point here. This is, behold the value of reverse pitching. So journalists, we're also always looking for stories. So there's this site out there, and there's some others, but the main one is called helpareporter.com. I'd recommend, if you haven't signed up for this site yet, to do it. You can, I also signed up for myself, and there's all kind of verticals you can sign up for. I'm signed up for the business and technology verticals. And essentially how it works is journalists go to HARO, Help a Reporter Out, and they put in story ideas that they're trying to write. For example, this first one, branded iPhone apps that enhance companies' products. So these are all stories I've written from HARO requests. So I put it out there and say, hey, I'm looking for companies who have made branded iPhone apps. Please send me those. And then I go through, I'll get 50, 60 emails or whatever. I go through all of them, and I ended up picking 13, for example. Or eco-friendly company transportation alternatives. Maybe I found 2 or 3, but I was looking for a lot more. So I say, I'm really looking for eco-friendly company transportation alternatives. I found this type of bus. I found this bike sharing thing. And I'm looking for some other ones. Are there any other eco-friendly company transportation alternatives people know about out there? And then I get a pitch. So the way I like to run this Help a Reporter, they send out 3 emails daily per vertical. But that's way too many emails for a startup founder. You're busy. What I do is I have a number of filters in my Gmail that send them all to trash, except for the ones that have certain keywords. And then they send them to the inbox. So I'd recommend to do that. If you set up the correct filters, you can make it really easy. So if certain things you do, like content strategy, is something I do. So if HARO comes out, someone's looking to write about startups who do content strategy, then I'm going to get that in my email. I'm going to see it and I'm going to be able to respond to it more efficiently than reading every single one of these. But for the first few days, it's nice to get all three of them, the morning, afternoon, and evening ones, just to see what they're all about. Then you'll be like, this is too much. Some final tips for success, and then we can open up for final questions. Be concise. As I mentioned, it's good to keep it to 4 or 5 sentences if you can, or even 3 or 4. Journalists don't have a lot of time, so they're looking to click through and get the information as soon as possible. That 1 sentence pitch in itself, if you take time to craft that, will serve you so much over the next few, at least year probably. But as you develop, you keep developing that 1 sentence pitch. Have a clear message. Make sure it's very clear from your email or your tweet or whatever it is, what is going on and what you're trying to ask of the journalist. Sometimes I also get pitches where they don't actually have an ask for me. They're like, hey, I thought you might be interested in our startup. Signed name. It's like, okay, thank you. Like, what do you want me to do? You need to have something newsworthy and a real ask, whether that's want to do a 30-minute phone call in the coming days with whoever. Do you want to meet for coffee? Would you like to see our press release? We have this embargoed thing. Would you be interested in writing about it for next Monday, etc.? And then finally, think like a reader. Go to that website, see what they cover, see what this individual covers, and think about their readers. If you were the reader of that site, which hopefully you are, hopefully you know enough about the site to understand what their readers read, would what you're pitching actually be useful for their readers? So think like a reader and really think about it. That's how journalists think. You need to think like that too. Journalists, as we're reading our emails and pitches, we say, is this something that my audience wants to see? If not, I'm not spending any time on it. And with that, you can email me at hi@ericaswallow.com, tweet me at ericaswallow, and then at the bottom here is my Udemy course for startup PR. I have, I think I made 100 free codes for MIT Rio. It's kind of like this information plus a little more, udemy.com/startuppr. And I will put these slides on SlideShare right after I change some of those typos and then send the link to Andrew so he can upload it.
Quite a few questions. How do you validate that the source information is actually authentic?
How do I validate that it's actually authentic?
Yeah, as a reporter or journalist, how do you address that?
It really depends on what the information is. For the startups that I'm writing about, I need to test all their apps. I test their products. So if I'm writing about a startup, I'll test it for a few days. That's why that 1 week is important, by the way, so that they have time to also, if you're giving them a product, test it. Sometimes I might check with users of the product, or I'll ask for case studies. If it's, for example, a B2B product, I want to know how certain businesses have already used it. So case studies or being able to talk to, I need to know an example. So if it's a B2B, like, okay, who are your clients? What do they use it for? And then I can also talk to those clients if necessary. Usually the case studies are pretty good. And then on data, it's, I can't really validate a lot of data. I have to go with my gut, like on those infographics. I take their word for it, but I kind of point to the source. Obviously, I'm like, this is an infographic created by this company, which does this. It's just like white papers. I wouldn't go and try to validate every one of the 50 citations that they have in their white paper. But if I read it, it sounds plausible, and the citations are strong, then I'm like, all right, this looks good.
All right. So a few more questions. Sean was asking, is it effective to focus the pitch? Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yeah, is it more effective to focus the pitch to the editor or the journalist? Because doesn't the editor control what the journalist writes?
Good point. It's always the journalist, because even though the editor controls it, often the pitches go from the journalist to the editor. It's not usually top down. Usually the journalist brings all the ideas to the editor who approves them. However, in places like Mashable and other places, the writers and myself, I was an editor, but we have the ability for news anyway, for news, to write what, like we had at Mashable, we had a quota. We had to write like at least 5 posts a day. And we knew what we're looking for, so we just go and write it. Sometimes we'll get a quick approval if necessary, but usually we don't. So it's always better to go with the journalist. Otherwise, the editor would be very overwhelmed.
Okay, next question, Christian's asking, is the coverage area more important than the prestige when looking to connect with the journalist? And I apologize, I have to move rooms because my booking time is up. So
yeah.
please go ahead and answer the question.
Yes, always try to get as any coverage as possible. It can be a very niche site, and it's like, this is the site to write about it. As soon as you get those lower level coverage, you can use those to pitch the higher prestige publications. So always try to get whatever you can. And you can always start low, it's fine. All right, well.
Do you have one more, are you okay for one more question?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, so is it helpful to plan out your pieces for embargoes? And do you send it all at once, or do you have separate embargoes depending on location or whatever other variables?
Yes. So typically the embargo has to be for a specific time in a certain time zone, but you can tell them whatever the time zone is in their time zone if you want. The time is in their time zone. Typically there aren't too many pitches going out at the same time. Usually a startup will have one major event, like their launch, their seed round, their series A, whatever the news is. And so you should always have all of those embargoes go out pretty much at the same time. I mean, you can even send out 20, 30 on Monday, because, you know, it's all about how much time you have to be personable and specific with your pitches. So you don't send out hundreds, obviously. Try to be very, like, pick your top 5 or 10 journalists and be like, I really want to make a good connection with these people. And then try to treat everybody like that. But the goal is, like, yes, send them all out. Make sure they just all have the same time. If there's different locations, you can also, if there's different types of news you want to do, so maybe you want to do you can do, for example, an exclusive on one part of the story, but then there's other parts of it. So I don't know, an exclusive would be that you're partnering with Apple to do something, and you're going to give that exclusive to TechCrunch. But then you're going to also talk about the launch of your product, and you're going to embargo that to everybody else for Monday. So things that are coming out is like, you're not telling the rest of all those other people that there's partnership with Apple for doing some whatever special part of your thing is, but you are telling everyone else in the embargo about a whole bunch of other things that also TechCrunch would have access to. That's kind of convoluted, but the general idea is you can send out embargoes as many as you want, as long as they all come out in the same time zone, the exact time.
Awesome. Erica, thank you for your time today. Thank you for sharing these insights. They have been very, very helpful.
It's been my pleasure, and I look forward to chatting with you guys more and speaking again in Rio. So you can always reach out to me, Twitter and email in between now and then.
All right, bye for now.
Bye. Thank you.